Hey, it's Seth. Before we get started, I want to take a quick moment to mention a way you can support the Concrete Logic podcast. Whether you're looking to expand your concrete knowledge or want to keep the show going, check out the Concrete Logic Academy at www.concretelogicacademy.com. You can always make a donation directly at www.concretelogicpodcast.com. Any amount helps, and we truly appreciate your support. Now let's get into today's episode. The concrete industry is facing a huge talent and productivity gap, one that hiring alone isn't going to solve. Today, we're diving into how AI can help tackle this issue by bringing productivity improvements from other industries into concrete. Ramy Sedra, CEO of C60 AI, joins us to explain how AI can unlock the hidden potential in your business, making operations more efficient, reducing inefficiencies, and even predicting outcomes to boost profitability. Stick around to find out how embracing AI can be the game changer the concrete industry has been waiting for. Now let's start the show.
What's the most used man-made material on Earth? I'll give you the answer. Concrete. This is the Concrete Logic Podcast. Have you ever stopped to think about the sidewalks, driveways, bridges, or the buildings around you? They're all made from concrete. So why don't we discuss it more? In each episode of Concrete Logic, we'll explore a unique concrete-related topic with the help of industry professionals shaping the trade's future. We'll talk with suppliers, contractors, architects, engineers, specialists, and even proponents of competing materials. We'll get their views on concrete and their visions for its future. So get ready to mix things up with Concrete Logic, where we turn the spotlight on the material that's everywhere but often overlooked. This is the Concrete Logic Podcast. And now, here's your host, Seth Tandett.
Welcome to another episode of the Concrete Logic Podcast. And today I have Ramy Sedra from C60 with us. He is the CEO of a AI-powered analytics platform, mainly working with ready-mix folks, so producers. And he's on the podcast today. He had a very interesting stat. I'm gonna steal from you, Ramy. We lose 4 people, and only one's coming in to replace them. We're looking at how possibly AI can help us with that. We talk about labor shortages all the time in the industry, and we instead of complaining about it, I think we got to start providing some solutions. I mean, about what you're seeing in the industry right now, and then we can kind of venture from there.
Seth, thanks a lot for having me on. I think you got it right. You summarized it correctly. You know, the key stat that keeps my brain kind of whirling about how we help the industry is that, you know, for every 4 that are leaving, you know, 1 is coming in. You know, I share the anecdote talking to a producer, you know, at the World of Concrete, and they were telling me that, you know, last year they lost 750 years of talent, 750 years of experienced talent to retirement. This year they'll lose another 600 or so. And, you know, the folks that are coming in are folks that are staying 2.5, 3 years in the industry. Some have 2.5 years, you know, when they come in, you know, they're going from one producer to another. But the people that are retiring have 20, 25 years of experience. So it's not just a question of you're losing, you know, this talent pool to retirement, but it's also how do you replace the knowledge gap that these people represent. And I think that's kind of a macro challenge that the concrete industry has to figure out, right? And so that's certainly one of the things that kind of keeps my brain kind of whirling about.
Yeah. So AI is going to fix all that, and the end. We're done. All right.
Wouldn't it be nice if it was that simple?
Yeah. So, yeah. I was going to mention, so the concrete industry, you're working mostly with the ready mixed producers, right? Is that okay? So explain, I guess, how you're seeing how AI could possibly help. Let's start with the producers first.
Sure. And I guess I'll preface it, Seth, with maybe a couple of things, right? Like a public service announcement. I think the first public service announcement is take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. And the reason I say that is I'm a relative newcomer to the industry, right? I've been I've been at this data and AI and advanced analytics game for the past, almost 30 years now, but, you know, new to the concrete industry. So, I've used this capability and this technology in other industries and solved problems that look very similar to the ones I'm seeing in concrete, but devil's in the detail. Right. And there's always nuances. And so I've been fortunate and surrounded myself with folks that have been in the industry for a very long time. Right. And they help keep keep my balance, checks and balances. Right. So take what I say with a grain of salt. Second is AI is not going to fix everything. Right. I think, lots of marketing machines out there would love you to believe that, but I'm a bit of a realist and both feet on the ground. So maybe that's why I like the industry so much, because it's an OBS industry. So I don't think, AI is going to fix everything in concrete. I think we need to look at improving productivity on the whole. And, in order to improve productivity on the whole, you need lots of tools. I think AI and data can be one great tool, in the toolbox. And, I think that's a tool that maybe is a little less natural for people to reach out to and to think about, but I'd love to put it in that context. Does that make sense? And then I'm happy to get into like how it can help producers, but I think just a level set. And I don't know if you would agree with me, but I think devil's in the detail. And number two, you can't solve everything with AI. It's one tool out of many others. Does that make sense to you?
It does. And, I shared with you before you hit record, I use AI every single day. And I can tell you that it's made me more productive. I would say my employer is getting oodles of productivity out of me now. And just for the simple fact that you can use AI, like you mentioned, I think you were getting to, was you can use it as a database that you can easily get answers to. So if you can share knowledge with AI and based on things that have it in some kind of document form, or I'm making this very simple, but if you can put it somewhere and then have AI go look for something for you, I mean, just that fact, just that kind of a search function. I mean, that it saved me so much time, and it can get things done so much quicker. Just having that is that kind of what you were getting at? I think you were mentioning, how we, maybe we didn't get to that. We were actually talking about that before we hit record. But I mean, can you expand on that? I mean, that's just, it seems like an easy use case for it.
Sure. It's definitely an easy use case. And I think the first thing is, how can you have a conversation with your business? Now, imagine, I don't know, think of like your favorite Disney movie, right? Like if you're, I don't know if I have kids and, they used to love watching Aladdin, right? And you can make a wish, right? And Aladdin can grant you any wish. And, where am I going with this? So it's like, imagine your business has got a genie inside, right? And all that knowledge is locked into that genie's mind, right? But the reality is that collective knowledge that exists in your business is in a whole bunch of data, right? That data is in your GPS, it's in your batching system, it's in your dispatch, it's in your ERP, it's in a whole bunch of systems. And, the world today, when a concrete producer or a professional in our industry wants to ask a question to the business, what do they need to do? They're going to go build a dashboard, or they're going to build a report, or they're going to ask one of their colleagues to do an extract of data, and they're going to put that in Excel. And then somebody's got to go and analyze it. And they got to use, their smarts and what they know about the business. They got to analyze it. And, I could go on with this explanation, Seth, for another 20 minutes, but you get the idea is that they're going to go on and on and on and do this to answer a question. And you know what the worst part is the second they've answered that question, they get another question that's related.
Right.
And then they're like, geez, I hope that the data I just extracted and put in Excel or built a report on can support the next question that I've got and the one after that. And it's incredibly unproductive. And so what people end up doing is they either rely on their gut, their instinct, or they ask questions once in a while because it's so painful to do this process. Or the worst part is they just don't ask the questions and they do what they think. And I think where AI can really play an important role is if you could have a conversation with your business, right? So imagine everybody's done a Google search, right? And you earlier when we were talking, you were telling me about ChatGPT, right? And, imagine you can go to ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT questions specifically about your business. And so taking those language models, taking that capability of AI, but turning it inward on your data, your specific data sets, your understanding of the business, right? Like the context becomes specific to your company. And now all of a sudden you're having a conversation with your business. That becomes very powerful because now you don't have to build Excel spreadsheets. You don't have to build ad hoc reports. You just type in a question, you get an answer. I mean, when you use ChatGPT and you ask it for summarize an email or, I don't know, compare X to Y, it does it instantly. And so I think that's one of the examples that we could bring to the concrete industry to just make people productive, very quickly, right? Because if you think about it, I was chatting with one of the producers in our network, and she was telling me, about 10% of her company can build reports and dashboards, right? And like analyze data and do all that fun stuff. But 60, 70, 80% of her business, right? People have questions. They all know how to do a Google search, right? But they don't know how to build a report. So if they could talk to the business, just like they did in a Google search, then imagine how you can empower the business to know stuff. It just kind of changes the game in terms of if I knew something, it would influence my decision. And so having that ability to just have a conversation with the business, huge productivity booster. I don't know if that helps kind of paint the portrait a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like I said, I'm very familiar with the product. I use it quite a bit. The one thing just for my personal use, and I never really kept a log of it, but what's the rate of error that one should expect from that? Because we've done a couple podcasts on AI, and previously that episode we were talking about how AI can help producers come up with a more sustainable mix design.
Yeah.
By looking at data that it's fed and I guess giving it parameters on, that. And my question to that guest was, is this going to replace an engineer? Like an engineer is the one that does the mix design now for us.
Yeah.
I hope they're not all using AI right now. But really, they just copy and paste specs. But we all know that. But anyways, industry joke, Ramy. Anyways, so what can one expect like an error rate? I mean, they're not accurate all the time, right? There still has to be a human that kind of looks over the AI shoulder and say, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. And I guess I would think about it this way. And by the way, I'm not suggesting, you just go use ChatGPT and load all of your data as a concrete producer into ChatGPT, because then you're putting all that data in the public domain. Like, bad idea.
Bad idea.
Do not upload your mixed designs in ChatGPT. And again, I don't want this to be a C60 infomercial, because it's really not the point. But, we've built, something that's purpose built for the industry. And the reason we did that is because it's hard to use the generic stuff, right? And I know that, others are going to do this as well. And I think it's good because it's the future, and, it's how we got to improve productivity. But how do you manage error rate? Because it's going to depend on the tools you use, and it's going to depend on the prompts you use, right? Which are basically the questions, right? And so what we found that helps is to really create AI agents that you give it a narrower context. So I'll give you an example. So we have a mix agent, right? Just because you talked about mix designs. So we have a mix agent, and the mix agent, the context is very narrow. It's the mixes that you have, and it's the performance of those mixes that you're seeking, and right. And so the AI learns around those mix designs in your catalog, and it'll help you answer questions around, alternative mixes. If I want an alternative design to do this similar type of performance, right, it's going to ask you questions, and it's going to narrow the scope of the Q&A that you're doing with the AI. And so the goal is to try and minimize that margin of error, but it's not foolproof. right? So I don't think it's going to replace the technical services team, right? It's not going to replace those technical engineers and those experts in our industry. But what it can do is it can give them a little more leverage in the business to support more people, right? Because if the technical services team has kind of taken that AI agent through the paces and they're comfortable, then it can be a tool for them to be, an interaction tool with the sales team, right? Hey, I need to price this job, or I need to think about this job. What are the alternatives that I have? And you could have a conversation. It could be a tool, a training tool for the, newcomers on the technical team. So, okay, well, did you think about this? And did you think about that? And how did you come up with this mix design, right? How are you solving that problem that the customer's presenting? So it can be a tool. And what it does is it just gives that technical services leader more time, right? But it's not foolproof. And, we kind of bake in this feedback loop. So we want producers to kind of rate the answer. I think if you use ChatGPT, you'll have seen this, right? It tells you ChatGPT can make mistakes and, monitor double check the responses and, hey, did this help you? Was it right? Was it wrong? So ChatGPT does that. And I think that's kind of a best practice is you got to get the feedback from the user. Over time, I think it's like Google in the early days, right? It's like the more you ask questions, the more it can index the responses, the better it can get at giving you content that's relevant. But you've got to be mindful that it's not perfect. So that's why I say it's a tool. It doesn't replace everybody, but it can. And as you get comfortable, as you've given it more feedback that the answers are accurate, that confidence grows, right? So you get into a better place statistically that you're good. But, we like to think of it as, let's start with narrow scopes of problems we could solve, answering mixed questions, generating pricing and estimates automatically, et cetera. So those kinds of things. Does that help, Seth, kind of set the context?
Yeah. So how long does it take to kind of learn a business? I guess, again, it depends on what you're teaching it. Let's stick with mixed designs.
Sure.
But is it put in, say I have, a couple years worth of submittals of mixed designs that I've used in the past. I know they're successful. Feed it to AI and then boom, it's ready to go. How much time does it take for a company to interface with AI till they can feel comfortable that it's providing them accurate information?
Well, you can start interacting with it the day you turn it on. Okay. But the reason why you can do that is because when it was built specifically around the context of, and I'm speaking specifically on the mixed design agent, right? But the other AI agents that we built is the same idea. So it was built specifically around the context of mixes in concrete, right? So it's seen, thousands and thousands of mixes. It understands the context of those mixes. It understands the types of, questions that you typically get around mixes and mixed design. So, the engineering from a product perspective is to build a product in such a way that the AI understands that context very well. So when you load a producer's data set, which is essentially, in this case, mixes, then it's going to understand how to interact with those mixes. Now, what it will be facing for the first time is going to be the types of questions that unique producer is asking, right? And so that will require refinement over time, and that's going to happen as you use it, right? Because you can't really, you can do some prediction of that and building the context, right? But it gets better as you use it and as you give it feedback. So you can use it right away. There's no limitations to that. It's going to give you answers that are meaningful, but they're going to get more meaningful over time. And how fast that happens is really a function of the types of questions and the frequency of use. Mm-hmm. And that's going to vary from one business to the next.
Just like a new employee.
Like a new employee.
Yeah.
I had a buddy of mine. He was really funny. He says, well, it's just like, it was terrible, but it's funny at the same time. He's like, well, it's just like, buying AI is like buying a baby. It's like you train it over time. And I said, but are you buying babies? No, that's not what I meant.
Yeah.
Can't be buying babies, but it's like a child, right? You're gonna get, your child is coming to the world and it's got some fantastic capabilities, and over time it's going to learn and get better.
So you've been doing this for a few years with ready mix producers, and you're learning the concrete industry. What is the most misunderstood about what's misunderstood the most about AI when you first start talking to customers about AI? Is there something that comes up every time and you're like, kind of put you on the spot?
Yeah, it's a great question. When I would tell you a couple of things kind of come to mind. I think the first one was, why we weren't talking about AI. And, we were talking to customers a lot about data. And the thing is, for us, for AI to be even useful, we had to help producers solve the data problem. Our industry has got full of silos, lots of data silos. So you got a batch system, you got a dispatch, a GPS, a CRM, ERP, and they're all great systems, and they're all going through lots of modernization, and that's amazing. And the industry needs that, but silos nonetheless. And so even if they're modernized, you just got a more modern silo. And so you've got all your data in lots of different baskets. And it's great. You can do AI in those individual baskets. But we thought, to really turbocharge a producer, you needed to do something more holistic. And so we really focused on solving the data problem for a producer and bringing all their data together. And producers have notoriously dirty data, for lots of good reasons. And solving, like cleaning data is a little bit like you go to somebody and say, go clean the ocean. Right? It's like, okay, well, where the heck do I begin? Is it the plastic? Is it the oil spill? Like, what is it that I go clean? Right. So it's figuring out what to target and really understanding, okay, well, what parts of my data do I need cleaner than others? Because those are really going to make the difference when I predict stuff. So I think the thing we were getting a lot kind of in the early days is like, well, why aren't you talking about AI more? And we were talking a lot about data. I think the second thing that we were getting is, like when you think about AI, it sounds like this very futuristic, it almost sounds like something out of a Star Wars movie, right? I say AI and you're expecting lasers to come like flying out of the screen or something. And really, if you, and I'm stealing from one of a great book that I really like called Prediction Machines. And if you're into, that, I would recommend that book. But I think if you take the word AI away and you replace it with the word prediction, and, you'll hear me talk a lot about prediction. And what we're trying to do is forecast or predict the impact to a business. And if you use that word instead of AI, then all of a sudden things become a lot more meaningful. You say, well, what in your business, Seth, could we predict that would have a meaningful impact on how you operate, right? And a meaningful impact that typically, I'm a CPA by trade. So, for me, typical, it means dollars, right? So if we could predict better pricing, if we could predict, which customer is going to hold a truck longer, if we can predict, what the cost is of holding up that truck, or we could predict, which mixes or which customers are more or less expensive to serve. If we could predict, which plants are going to over batch, right, or over design mixes. If we can predict these things, right, if we can predict which customer is going to churn. So if we could predict all of those things, could that help your business, right? And so all of a sudden you're not talking about AI anymore, right? You're talking about things that if you could predict an outcome, like if I could predict the winning lottery numbers next week, well, geez, that could change my life, right? So so I would say those are the kind of the two things. The first is like, well, we talked a lot about data, and the second is, not using the word AI, right, and thinking about it more in terms of prediction, because then it's a little bit more relatable.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So people are getting hung up on the AI, the name AI, and they're thinking, I don't know what they're thinking. It's some futuristic thing, and it's gonna, you said Star Wars. When I think of AI, I think people might think of Terminator. It's gonna take over, and they're gonna be our overlords one day or something. But yeah. It was interesting. You were talking about how dirty data is. This whole exercise that you're doing with your customers, I bet an outcome, I would guess, would be, hey, we need to start collecting our data in a certain way so this tool does what we need it to do. So it's worth the money that we're spending on it. So what is there a certain way that we're collecting that we need to be collecting data now that so that this thing AI understands better what we want it to do? What does that look like?
Great question. I love this question. And the reason I love the question is because, our industry doesn't have a ton of IT and data people running around in the business. It's like saying, well, you can't drink water until we go clean the ocean, right? Well, that's going to be, you're going to die of thirst before you ever finish cleaning the ocean. So what's the alternative? The alternative is let's go to where the data is. Let's connect to the data the way it is. And if we understand the industry, let's invest in understanding, the typical abnormalities that we would expect to find in concrete data. And that's one of the advantages of surrounding yourself with people that really know and understand the industry is by understanding those abnormalities. Well, you can train, right? We use AI in our data quality, right? And so we're eating our own dog food. And so by doing that, we can go and, apply algorithms and rules that are essentially going to help us accelerate that data cleaning. And the goal, like we don't build a P&L. Right. We're not building an accounting system where everything's got a balance to the penny. What we're trying to do is tell you directionally where your business is over or underperforming and why and what you got to change. Now, whether the opportunity is $1,000 or it's 1,001 or it's 800, it's an important opportunity to go fix. The fact that it's not to the penny accurate doesn't matter. You just want to know, am I heading north or am I heading south? Right. And so what we've done is we've invested in kind of building that out because we believed that, again, we can't wait for a producer to use their data in the perfect way. I think that's a great ambition to have greater data, but it takes time, takes a lot of investment, takes a lot of coaching and educating people on how to use systems. And, we've also got this amazing thing happening in the industry where a lot of the big sort of ERP producers, that build batching systems and dispatch systems in our industry, those systems are upgrading now to the cloud and they're modernizing how producers work. And so they're building better frameworks for people to manage their data. And that's great. We're going to be the beneficiary of that, but you shouldn't have to wait until that happens to be able to take advantage of your data, right? So we really wanted to solve that problem up front by connecting into the data, automating all of that data quality, removing, as much of the noise as we possibly can from that data. Doesn't have to be perfect, has to be just, I'm going to geek out on you a little bit, but it has to just be statistically relevant, right? That you can use it in that prediction, right? So it doesn't have to be 100%, it has to be, good enough, right? And so that's what we've done because otherwise, for producers, it becomes this daunting task of like, geez, here's another, digital technology promise that I can never actually materialize in my business because I'm never going to have perfect data, right? So you don't need it.
Yeah. So if a producer, they're like, hey, what we're doing is working. That's a thing you'll hear in the construction industry. Hey, this is working. Why upend everything and wedge in AI? Why do that?
There's a couple of reasons I could think of. The first is like most producers, are running spreadsheets to manage and analyze their business, right? And I think they inherently or instinctively know what they need to monitor in their business. Especially people have been doing this for generations. We're not going to teach them the concrete business. But I guess the question becomes, could you do it better? Could you be more productive, right? If instead of relying on averages, average delivery times or average, hourly costs, or if you could rely on, precision, how could that help you, right? If you could know now if you are profitable today or yesterday and whether you're going to be profitable tomorrow and, you knew what you could change to be more profitable tomorrow, could that help you? The time you spend doing those spreadsheets that you're doing in Excel and, applying the family recipe of how to analyze the business. If there was a more specific way to do that or a faster way to do that or a way that you didn't have to do it, but it was done for you, would that help you? Right. And got to think about it in terms of like, if the business is going by faster, right? And now your competitors that could be bigger or smaller, right, are using this, and it's making them more productive and more competitive. And that translates to, they could get better pricing, or they can generate better margins, or, they're giving better service, or they're partnering, in a more value-added way with their customers. Is that a threat to you, or could that be a threat to you? Right. So I'm not going to sit here and say, well, this is why you should, but I think there's some questions you should be asking yourself as a producer as to whether this could help, right? And whether there's opportunity, and if you don't think you're leaving money on the table, if you don't think that you could improve performance, if you think that the recipe you've applied for generations is the right one and it's, it shouldn't change, then by all means, don't look at the innovation, right? Like maybe it's not for you. So I would just invite people to think about those things and ask themselves that question, right? It's a little bit like the microwave. I mean, I have a microwave in my kitchen. Once upon a time, I didn't have a microwave, and we when I grew up, we didn't have a microwave and we didn't use a microwave. I kind of like the convenience that it provides.
Yeah. Right. Well, yeah. Well, you've been doing this for a few years, so you can probably share some data with the ones that have adopted the technology and share. It's kind of one of those things you don't know what you don't know. So if you can point to, hey, this is how we used it with this customer, and this is what they saw. Because bottom line is, they want to see a return on their investment. I always ask, if I spend X, what's my Y? You gotta give me the Y. But yeah, it's interesting, and also you can think the more we use AI, the more data centers we got to build. So that's good. It's a crazy world out there as far as that goes. But I think we're getting towards the end here, Ramy. Is there something else you want to share with the folks before we go?
Well, let me share one thing. So, because you asked about return on investment, and I think that's a one thing, that's really important. At least it's always at the center of my mind, being a CPA, is one of the things that we uncovered last year. So with our class of 24, right, the customers that were on our platform last year, is on average, they were leaking about $7 a yard in margin. So we could quantify for them, the size of the problem. And so that's, quantifying the inefficiencies in the business, right? And pinpointing the inefficiencies in the business. And as a result, that gives them the opportunity to recover some of that $7. Now, nobody's going out, Seth, and recovering $7 a yard. I mean, that would be too good, right? But, whether they're recovering, 50 cents, $1, $2 on that lost margin, and think about that. This is margin that they intended to make, right? But they're otherwise losing because of just inefficiencies in the business that they're not able to see because they don't have the granularity of the data. They can't analyze it in real time. They can't get that at the tip of their fingers. And so, you ask, well, why would you do this? What's the return? I would say, how much, like I would ask the question, right? How much margin are you leaving on the table? Do you know? And, what could you do about it? So, I'll leave you with those questions, but something for producers to think about. Yeah,
that's a good point. When I heard $7, I was thinking that sounds like a discount for the concrete contractor. But Ramy, I appreciate you coming on the show today. If folks want to reach out to you, what's the best way? What's your preferred way?
Best way is ramy.sedra@c.
Okay. Yeah. And we'll put that in the show notes. Make sure you check out the show notes, not just for Ramy's contact information, but how you can support the show. So make sure you get on there and check out the show notes. Ramy, thank you for coming on the show today.
Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. And folks, until next time, let's keep it concrete.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Concrete Logic Podcast. If you got value from the show, here's how you can provide value back to support the show. Visit concretelogicpodcast.com and click the donate button to send value back. All dollar amounts are truly appreciated. And now, to close out the show, here's Mike Dunton.
That alarm always sings couple hours before the sun comes up. Open up the side, put some diesel in the lights, nights and wait till the trucks roll up. Yeah, this ain't how most folks live their lives, dripping in sweat, working overtime. But while they're tying their ties for their 9 to 5s, we're out here changing these skylines with wood, iron, and mud. We work hard for $1, give thanks to the Lord above. Never make a man do something you can't prove. Hard work calls for a drink or two. Expect more, it's written in our blood. With wood, iron, and mud. From the swamps to the city, from the Lone Star heat to the woods of the Georgia pine. Good old boys and girls who ain't afraid of getting dirty for a clean time. And if you want to see the fire in a grown man's eyes beneath the hot summer sun, find the wild-eyed boys clocking days and nights, working hard to get that job done with wood, iron, and mud. We work hard for $1, give thanks to the Lord above. The color of our collars ain't white or blue, we're all gray collar through and through. Expect more, it's written